the sexual revolution initiated a tidal wave of social change. Its effects were comprehensive, influencing individual lives and national policy. They were also far-reaching, representing the confluence of worldviews and ideas, advances in medicine and technology, and the displacing of social and religious mores. 2 generations after the sexual revolution, and we are still experiencing the fallout. Now, the sexual revolution occurred between the 1960s and the 1980s, and it also occurred in tandem with what's known as second-wave feminism. Second-wave feminism, unlike its first-wave foremothers of the 1920s, focused on the equal participation of women in society, especially the workplace. To achieve this full equality, women had to be liberated, specifically liberated from the social constraints of sexual mores, the cultural constraints of marriage, and the biological constraints of maternity. In other words, women's liberation required freedom from female biology. And with the advent of one little pill, that all became possible. In 1960, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the first oral contraceptive pill, typically referred to as simply the pill. The pill had been the dream of Margaret Sanger, the founder of what is now known as Planned Parenthood. The first contraceptive pill meant that women could separate or divide sex from pregnancy, and could also avoid the social stigma that came from being pregnant outside of marriage. But that wasn't all. 13 years later, in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion. It's important to note that most second-wave feminists who were part of the sexual revolution viewed abortion on demand as an essential part of women's liberation. With the pill and abortion, women would be free to pursue their ambitions without being defined or limited by the expectations of society or the demands of men. Sex became decoupled from relationships, meaning people were free to engage in sexual relationships according to their desires and their impulses. The sexual revolution changed what society considered acceptable. In fact, it changed the idea of acceptable altogether. Fast forward to today, and the only determining factor of whether a sexual relationship is valid or moral is consent. Now, it didn't take long for the negative effects of the sexual revolution to come to the surface. Here are just a few. First, the acceptance of no-fault divorce. Prior to the 1960s, divorce was rare. With sexual license and the pursuit of individual fulfillment in relationships, divorce became more common and more commonly accepted. Reasons such as incompatibility or irreconcilable differences were legitimate reasons to dissolve a marriage. Research shows that women often receive the greater financial burden following a divorce and bear a greater hardship on its impact. Second, the hookup culture. Following the sexual revolution, men and women approached sex as a purely biological urge or recreational activity, apart from any personal or relational responsibility. Sex has become considered as casual as a handshake. Colleges host traditions like Sex Week, and having sex is treated as less intimate than having a conversation. But despite how casually our post-sexual revolution culture approaches sex, its emotional and neurological effects are anything but casual. One Boston College professor revolutionized her campus after she observed how the hookup culture had damaged an entire generation's ability to create and build relationships. So she gave her students the assignment to go out on a traditional date. And this date could have no more physical contact than a side hug. The rules she gave were so old-fashioned, But as old-fashioned as they sounded, the excitement her students expressed was contagious. Her discussion forums were so packed that students were sitting on the stairs just to attend. She describes the collateral damage hookup culture has caused women with a question she received from a female college student at one of those forums. This student asked, "How do you stop feeling?" Hookup culture isn't just harming women. It's gaslighting them, telling them that they shouldn't expect the man to whom they give their physical selves to take any responsibility for their emotional selves, and that all of this is just a part of being free, liberated, and empowered. And if she expects more than a no-strings-attached hookup, she risks being called demanding or just ditched for someone else. Another effect of the sexual revolution is cohabitation. What your grandmother probably called living in sin is now just a step in a dating relationship that theoretically allows the couple to test drive partnered life. As a result, marriage means little more than a piece of paper, and a wedding represents little more than a big party. But it didn't help couples prevent divorce. Quite the opposite, in fact. Studies indicate couples who lived together before marriage were even more likely to divorce than couples who didn't. Next, and unsurprisingly, the sexual revolution brought a decline in marriage rates. The average age of a first marriage among Americans continues to increase, and this is affecting both women and men in cyclical ways. For men, the maturing events of marriage and fatherhood are delayed. Why settle down when you can live with your girlfriend or have a revolving door of sexual encounters without the burden of responsibility? Incidentally, sociologists and psychologists are trying to catch up to and explain the cultural crisis among a generation of men who feel lost and aimless. Among women of that same generation, career ambitions coupled with cohabitation and casual sex mean that she can delay marriage and motherhood indefinitely. Or so she thinks. Millennial women especially find themselves achieving significant accomplishments educationally and vocationally, only to look around and wonder, where are all the men? Our culture tells us that the restraints of responsibility are stifling and unhealthy, horribly unromantic, hopelessly archaic, and harmfully repressive. But the data among married women tells a different story. Multiple studies have revealed that highly religious or devout women report a greater degree of sexual satisfaction. As sex became socially accepted as a purely biological urge, pornography became more and more normalized. There's a reason that prior to Roe v. Wade, Playboy magazine ran monthly articles advocating for abortion. Hugh Hefner didn't have much use for a sex object who was saddled with a pregnancy. With unfettered access to birth control and abortion, and a culture that celebrated unrestraint, women who made themselves pornographic objects were participating in their own liberation, unconcerned with outdated societal norms. As a result of the hookup culture, no-fault divorce, cohabitation, society, as a result, witnessed the increase of fatherlessness. The data on fatherlessness is devastating. Having a father in the home is among the greatest predictors of a child's future academic and vocational success. Lack of a father is one of the greatest predictors of poverty, lack of emotional and mental health, criminal behavior, and vulnerability to abuse. In fact, economist Jennifer Morse demonstrated that strong national economies are linked to stable two-parent homes in which children grow up with both a mother and a father. As sex became decoupled from relationships, the nuclear family was destabilized as the core unit of society. In fact, some feminist thinkers of the 1960s and 70s claimed marriage itself was a form of slavery, one from which women should be liberated. This decentering of the nuclear family created a vacuum. When people were unable to define themselves in family terms, they looked for another source in which to anchor these existential questions. Enter identity politics. In her work Primal Screams, Mary Eberstadt observes how visceral so many social protests of today have become. She calls them pre-rational, meaning before or beyond the influence of reason. People seem to be acting out in frustration for something that is beyond the issue that they're actually protesting. Eberstadt identifies the rise in identity politics as filling a vacuum left by the breakdown of the nuclear family. Political affiliations no longer represent what we believe, but who we are. And if you've ever attempted to disagree with someone's political beliefs, you've probably encountered this. Disagreement is not a critique of one's ideas, it's an attack on one's existence. From identity politics, we also see the intolerance of political views that do not match one's own. We have become a society that cannot brook disagreement because politics has become a source of our identities, and that is, in large part, because politics has replaced family. Finally, the sexual revolution has destabilized our society as a whole. In the early 1900s, British social scientist J.D. Unwin attempted to prove Sigmund Freud's idea that sexual license created a more flourishing and healthy society. He studied the sexual behaviors of history's greatest civilizations, expecting to find the demise of societies that restricted sexual expression. But what Unwin found shocked him. Without exception, the society that directed sexuality toward family life inevitably expanded. But the society that sanctioned sexual license, as in sexual behavior that did not contribute to family life, that society inevitably declined. In his own words, any society is free to choose either to display great energy or to enjoy great sexual freedom. The evidence is that it cannot do both for more than one generation. The effects of the sexual revolution prove what we know from the very beginning of human history. Fallen, sinful humanity believes that we are the best judges of what will make us happy and fulfilled, that we can determine the boundaries of our own existence, that God is holding us back from happiness and his commands couldn't possibly be fulfilling. But every time we defy and disobey our Creator, we invite the self-inflicted harm that disobedience brings, consequences that he loves us enough to warn us against and protect us from. The sexual revolution may have seemed like liberating progress, but its effects have only harmed and hindered the very women it promised to set free.